Hey everybody, Albatross coming in hot. Yeah, that's right. I just saw this. I know this seems to be a common theme, right now. It's like I don't seem to pick up on these news articles until like weeks later. I don't know what's up with that, but I see it now. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about this new pope. Oh, but before I do, I don't have a written disclaimer on the screen, so okay. Please do not attempt to contact anybody I talk about in this video or anybody you see in this video. Okay? Do not try to contact them. This is my commentary and opinion on public figures and public information. And I strongly suggest that viewer discretion would be advised and trigger warning. There will be lots of details that pertain to crimes against children and crimes of humanity in this video. Okay, now with all that out of the way, oh yeah, and please sign and share the petition in the description. Okay, let's continue. Now, a couple things first. Now, I watched a video on Sean Atwood where he's interviewing someone named Kevin A. Now, this guy Kevin A., I don't really know much about him. I don't know how credible he is, and he's the only person I've heard this from. However, if what he's saying is true, it probably wouldn't be discussed in the mainstream media, in my opinion. But according to him, and this is according to him, not me, I haven't heard this from anywhere else, that this new Pope Leo is currently being indicted. That's what he says. That's what he says. You won't find that anywhere, but, and according to him, according to him, he is being investigated for eyewitness testimony, according to Kevin, eyewitness testimony claiming they saw him participate in, satanic rituals in 1983 on the, was it the summer solstice or the fall equinox? One of those. In 1983. So, like I said, that's the only source I've heard that from. So I can't actually verify it. All I know is that this Kevin A., he's apparently he's not someone who just popped up out of nowhere. He's someone who's been talking for a long, long time about different, global issues. At one point, he was even nominated for Nobel Peace Prize. Not that that really means anything, but so he's not just some random guy who just popped up. Okay. But they do have some news articles about these victims and survivors advocate groups having big concerns because apparently our new pope has a history of covering up child sex abuse. And we'll get into all the articles. Now, apparently, according to this advocate group, Pope Leo in Chicago, when he was there, and in Peru, somewhere in South America, he did the same thing, which was when a priest was implicated or accused of harming children. He would do what they've always done, what they were exposed to doing 10 years back. Or wait, no, not 10 years back. 20 years back, they were exposed. They did what he did, what they always do. He just shuffled these priests around from church to church, location to location. And they've done this for such a long time. Well, the funny thing about it is when the Catholic, technically, the very beginning and origins of the Catholicism and stuff, all the way back to Constantine I, when they were setting up these rules for the Christian religion. Christianity was a thing before Constantine, but when he got his fingers in it, he took it upon himself to make some rules surrounding it. And one of those rules was that priests and bishops they couldn't just it was absolutely condemned for them just to switch church to church to church. That and originally wasn't ever supposed to be a thing that they were allowed to ever do. Once they were in a church, they're supposed to be in that church for until they died. That's how it was established to be. Now, maybe Constantine couldn't predict the future, and that like the whole organization, what would happen and what they would end up doing to children, but I don't know. Maybe they weren't doing it in the beginning. I wasn't there. This was 2,000 years ago. Almost 2,000 years ago. But yeah, that's how old Catholicism is. It's almost 2,000 years old. It's like almost as old as Jesus. And we'll get in a little bit to how they felt about Jesus in the beginning and how he felt about them. We'll get into that. But right now, let's talk about Pope Leo and his questionable past. And, oh yeah, and a lot of these survivor advocate groups, made it known. Now, I had to really look hard to find these articles. Because if you just, Google Pope Leo, you're going to see only positive articles about him. You're only going to see positive stuff about him. But when you, start looking it into, the context of, survivors and stuff, then these articles pop up. That's how I finally found them. Because, I had watched that Sean Atwood video, and I was like, that's just not surprising. Why did I... And you know what? I don't know. Part of me just had a feeling. I don't know. When Pope Francis died, I'm like, okay, this moment's either going to make or break them. This is the moment where they decide to change things forever, or the moment where they really just try to cement in place this thing where they try to cover up all these crimes. And a lot of people are heartbroken the fact they would pick someone who has a history of covering these things up and excusing it. Not just covering it up, but absolving their crimes and everything. It's wild. But the Vatican, right? If you wonder if the Vatican was ever okay with this or if they were ever a part of it, well, a little tell, in my opinion, is did you know it was up until just a few years ago, just 3 or 4 years ago, I think. Let me think. Oh crap, no, I'm getting my dates wrong. 2017 or 2018-ish, somewhere around that time. The Vatican finally made it a crime to own child porn, or child molestation in general was not a crime in the Vatican. None of that was a crime in the Vatican. And yes, the Vatican is their own country. They got their own rules. And up until a few years back, those rules were never a part of their government. Weird, right? Considering their long history and considering they were exposed for this disgusting systemic behavior 20 years ago. It took them how long to make it an actual Vatican rule? And guess what the reasoning was for it? Oh my gosh. All of this is disgusting, okay? Their reasoning, right, was so that the surrounding countries' officials would stop prosecuting their priests and they could prosecute them directly at the Vatican. That's why they made those laws a couple years back. And in my opinion, it wasn't really to have any change. It was just so that they could keep it under the wraps better. That's my opinion. Because guess what? Here's another thing really telling. I don't know if it was when the movie Spotlight came out in 2015 or when it was that Pope Francis made the statement. But when it was really becoming public knowledge, they were exposed 20 years back, but it doesn't seem like a lot of people really knew how deep it was until the movie Spotlight came out. And guess what the Pope had to say when everyone was, thrashing them and, giving them some hate? Pope Francis said, what did he say? He said something like, hopefully we can find a path for redemption. That's what he said. He was worried about the redemption. He wasn't worried about the victims healing or the children growing up with normal lives. The people he's supposed to be concerned about, his his children, the people who his priests are supposed to protect. He's not worried about them. He was worried about the redemption of the church. Even though they had yet to even, like, dude, slow your roll. You haven't even, like, faced any kind of consequences and you're already worried about redemption? That's not the way it works. There are consequences to actions. Even if everyone chose to forgive you, which they haven't, there's consequences. Even if God has forgiven you, there's still consequences. So just keep all that in mind, right? Keep all that in mind. And if you're wondering, well, have they done anything different in the last 10 years other than maybe change their law in the Vatican? Have they done anything different? Well, I don't know. Let's look and see. But first, let's go back to the roots of the Catholic Church. All the way back to Constantine the First. Now, in early, it would have been like the early 300s AD. Oh crap! I know I sound like an idiot. I guess that would be let me think. Okay, no, the first century would be that. That would be the second century. That would be okay. This would be like third or fourth century AD. Okay. Back then, whenever Constantine the First was in power, whatever date that was, I'll tell you in a second. Okay. 303 AD to about 325 AD was when Constantine the First was establishing his little tentacles into their religion that previously the whole Roman Empire had been persecuting and killing and all this other stuff. But there's two councils that took place. The first council was the Council of Arles or Arles, which they say was 313 AD, but that's just when it ended. This meeting, or council, stretched for 10 years. It began in 303 AD, and it went all the way to 313 AD. Keep in mind that Constantine didn't even fully win his seat as emperor until 312 AD. So about 1 year before this council finally concluded. But it had been going on for a decade. Now, I'm not really sure why he was convening this council for this long. I'm not sure if he had his quote-unquote vision before this council, or if it was during the battle in 312 when he actually won. I'm a little unclear about that. The information surrounding these councils are a little vague. So, but at some point, according to Constantine, before he became emperor, he had this vision of who he thought was the Christian God, who helped him win, I guess, or something like that. I don't know. He did something, showed him something that suddenly made him proclaim himself as a Christian. But this council, what was this council about? Well, apparently, this council was about a lot of things, but the main thing that they really have info on was, I think, there was this group, right, who separated from the Christian church, or organization, as you call it, when the Roman officials started getting involved. They were called the Donatists. I'm not really sure the origin of that name, but they were called the Donatists, right? They were the church in North Africa, or they moved to No. They were the Church of North Africa, right? And then, once this fellow Cecilian was appointed as a bishop, they were like, oh, no. We don't want any parts of this. Because, keep in mind, the previous 300 years or so, they had been persecuted, they had been killed, all the Christians, they've been thrown to lions, they've been burned alive, they've been crucified, like in the literal sense, like where they were nailed up on crosses for everyone coming into Rome to see. Like, they did horrible things to these people to get them to stop talking about this message of Jesus. They did some horrible things, the Roman Empire did. So keep in mind that when suddenly this Constantine character comes along and he proclaims, peace to religion, I'm a Christian myself, and this and that and the other. And after years and years of being persecuted, killed, thrown to lions, I'm sure they were ready for some peace. Just to learn and to grow spiritually, you know what I mean? So most of them, accepted this, but this particular group didn't. I mean, they did up until Cecilian was appointed as bishop. Why did they not like this guy, Cecilian? What was his deal? Why didn't they want any parts of him being parts of this? Well, the reason they didn't like this guy goes back before Constantine. You see, when they were being persecuted, being killed, when their sacred texts and sacred books were being burned and all of this stuff, they had this crime that they would call a traditor. A traditor was someone who back then would hand over sacred texts or scriptures to Roman officials. That's literally what a traditor was. It's specifically referring to this time period in history when the Christians were being killed and persecuted by the Roman Empire. It's a historical fact. They were being killed, persecuted, chased, all around from the Roman Empire and killed. Well, a traditor was basically what it's kind of halfway what it sounds, a traitor. They would hand to save their own skin, or if they were just a spy all along, they would hand over documents that were sacred to the Christian community then to be burned or destroyed, handed right to the Roman Empire. Okay, keep that in mind. That's important. So at that point, the Roman Empire had acquired a lot of these sacred texts, whether they had burned them or archived them. Who knows? I'm sure a lot of them they burnt right in front of their faces, but there were multiple copies, so who knows? Maybe they kept some copies for themselves. This was a message they perceived as very dangerous to their control. And that's important in my opinion, because, if you think about something, remember, the Bible, when they talk about when, the Pharisees and all that stuff, when they wanted to crucify, when they wanted the Roman Empire to crucify Jesus, Pontius Pilate was reserved about it. He was a Roman Empire official. He was like, I don't know, why? He's not bothering me. Jesus at that time was only bothering, the Pharisees at that time. So, it was a relatively small movement. And, so I guess Pontius Pilate at the time didn't perceive it as, a threat. He's like, I don't know. So then, all that ended up happening. They ended up paying these people to choose the murderer over, all that stuff ended up happening. So they ended up crucifying Jesus, right? Okay. Then, after he's dead, and his message starts to, the apostles do what they say they're going to do. They start to spread his message. They start to spread Jesus' message. Now, suddenly, it starts to become a threat to the Roman Empire. Whatever he was teaching, whatever these apostles were teaching, was very threatening to their power structure. Very threatening. Your guess is as good as mine. I have my opinions, but, So anyways. So then, for centuries after that, as the message spreads, it grows. They start killing people, persecuting people. all this stuff. Now suddenly, and then there's other things going on besides that, like in the actual power structure itself. There's fighting amongst themselves. Like you'll get to periods where there's like two emperors, and then one of them dies, and tensions get created, and so on and so forth. Well, when Constantine came into power, it's like something similar. It's like a lot to it. I'll link it below if you want to go read it all. I'm not going to go into like every detail of how like he won and became emperor, because it's a little confusing to me. It's a lot. Maybe if enough people ask me to, I will. But anyways, so Constantine ends up defeating his rival, right? So he becomes emperor, and then he's like a breath of fresh air to these Christians who have been killed and like hunted and all this stuff for centuries, because he's self-proclaiming as a Christian, that the Christians are free to practice their religion. So they thought that they could just breathe, right? You know, I'm sure it was nice. I mean, that, how can anyone like grow or be happy when they're constantly being hunted and killed? And maybe that was the point. But anyway, so Constantine comes in. Now, a lot of historians think or question if his conversion to Christianity was sincere or not, or if it was politically motivated. Maybe it was political. I mean, who knows? It probably, like, at this point grew so much to the point where the Emperor of Rome was saying he was a Christian. Like, it had grown a lot. So I'm sure that the empire at that point really perceived it as dangerous, when Constantine perceived it as an opportunity, in my opinion, in a lot of historians' opinions. So, okay, now fast forward. Now he's emperor. He's already declared that the Christians are free, and then this stuff, and then about 1313, towards the end of this council, and they established a lot more than at this meeting than just one thing. It was so many things. It was like roles for bishops and priests, and all this stuff. They agreed on a lot of things, like the date for Christmas and stuff. However, they never did come to like a decisive date for Easter, and you can see that even to this day they still haven't decided a set date for Easter. That dates back all the way to these councils. They kept arguing and stuff, and they couldn't actually decide. So now to this day, they still can't decide what day Easter is. So now, Constantine doesn't like that there's like people like separating and stuff. Like important people who are part of this religious movement. So this Council of Arles, or Arles, which was before the Council of Nicaea, that this group comes before Constantine and his council, right? To hear their issues and concerns about Caecilian and all this other stuff. They explain Caecilian is one of these traitors who had previously, when they were being persecuted by the government, he was one of the ones who handed over important documents and sacred texts to Roman officials. Keep this in mind. They're telling the new Roman emperor this. Like, trying to argue that the Roman officials were enemies and he gave them our sacred texts. And Constantine, the new leader of these Roman officials, do you really think that he's going to fairly hear their point? Well, he didn't, because, he was pretty harsh to this group. And he pretty much, like, ignored their concerns because listen, get this. He asked them if they could provide proof he did this. And since they couldn't, he took Caecilian's word over theirs. He took a Roman traitor's word over the word of many, many, many Christians. The guy who was a newly Christian, the new emperor, and he's like, nah, I still want him to be bishop. He's going to be the bishop. So, then he became bishop. All the charges were, dismissed in this, because Constantine, he's like, nah, he gets to do whatever he wants. He's the bishop. I trust him, right? That's enough for me. You guys haven't provided any proof enough for me that he shouldn't be the bishop. So, this new Christian, who is the emperor, he suddenly wants to decide who gets to do what in this religion. Isn't that convenient? Suddenly, now that these Christians perceive him, the main public perceives him as a Christian. Well, now that he's gotten in the good graces, now he gets to say what happens or doesn't happen to this whole entire sect of this religion. Just keep that in mind. This is history, guys. This is the history of the Catholic Church. It's not the history of Christianity. Please don't confuse me, because they're not the same thing. I'm talking about the Roman Catholic Church. The same people who killed them, threw them in lions' dens for entertainment, now suddenly got to call the shots. And they got to choose, and later in the Council of Nicaea, what was or wasn't put in the Bible. 12 years later. After they had like a significant period of peace, and they got comfortable with Mr. Constantine, then he really went in for the kill, and in my opinion. And so they like to blur history a lot. But this happened. And previously to Roman involvement, there's no proof that Christians were even allowed to kill anybody. Because what happened was, and they talked about this in the second council, in the Council of Nicaea, was that Christians were refusing to kill, in cases of war and stuff, or refusing, or the church didn't want to give them permission to join the army. And then at the Council of Nicaea, Constantine changed that. He changed all those roles. Then suddenly, what happened after that? It then became a long, centuries-long campaign. Later, years and years later after this council, and they went overseas. They were killing people who wouldn't convert. And suddenly Jesus' message, which was of love, now suddenly it's just a death threat to neighboring nations. His message of love. Do you think Jesus would have been okay with that? And another point I'd like to make before I move on from this disturbing piece of history. It's the Catholic Church's symbol of the religion, right? Now keep this in mind. The Roman Empire hated Jesus up until this point. They hated him because his message was causing them nothing but trouble. You know what I mean? It was becoming a nightmare for them. Why do you think they were killing so many people and throwing them to lions and stuff? So no, they hated Jesus. And keep in mind that crucifixion was not new. Jesus was not the first person to get crucified, okay? That was a Roman Empire thing that they did. That was one of their styles of execution, was nailing people to crosses before it ever happened to him. I mean, remember, there was 2 other people getting crucified that day. He was getting crucified for things totally unrelated to what was going on with Jesus. So that was just their method of execution. So, the same organization who came up with this manner of killing, who did it to Jesus, suddenly say that they love him now. Well, if you really love someone and their message, why would that be your symbol? An image of Jesus, bloody, beat up, at the worst moment in his physical life. Put it in every church. Hang it up like a trophy. Like they used to do to the people they killed all up and down their highways. They have an image of that in every single one of their churches. This horrible death depicted everywhere. as if it's unique to Jesus only. And it wasn't associated like with crime or martyrism or all this other stuff. That's their symbol. The cross. What's the cross a symbol of? It's a symbol of death, guys. Like, it was not unique to Jesus. The cross was not unique to Jesus. I'm telling you, the Roman Empire, the cross was a connotation. It was a negative connotation back then. It was not associated with anything positive. Not before or after. I mean, they turned it into something positive, but I don't think Jesus would have wanted that image of him in every single church. Do you? Wouldn't you think, like, I don't know, in my opinion, a better image would maybe when he conquered death? Because that was not a victorious moment in the story of Jesus. That was a very low, dark moment. But that was the moment they chose to symbolize their whole religion. This is just my opinion. And listen, I've got more on all of this on my other YouTube channel. The only reason I'm talking about this on this channel is because it relates to children. If you want to know more info about Jesus's real message and stuff, I have stuff on my other YouTube channel if you're interested. But just so you guys know, like, what I'm talking about here has nothing to do with Christianity. Like, real Christianity has nothing to do with that. I'm talking about this organization that claim to have dominion over Christianity. And the Catholic Church did not start with Jesus. It started with the Roman Empire. Very important. Why do you think they had a whole Protestant Reformation? Because they were sick of them destroying Jesus' message. During the Protestant Reformation, they basically thought that the whole Catholic Church was an organization for the Antichrist. They did! Why do you think they thought that? I know eventually they came to, like, I guess, somewhat peaceful terms with the Catholic Church, but, like, and I know now a lot of people link Christianity and the Catholic Church together, but they have not been the same thing historically. I know the Catholic Church keeps trying to dig their claws and take monopoly over it every time it pops up, but there always seems to be the separation, and if you wonder why that is, this is why. It's because it's not the same thing. That's my opinion. My opinion. Please don't come and attack me and try to tell me that I'm a heathen like other people have in the past. Because if you're doing that, you have no idea who I am. Okay. So, with all that said. I want to read real quick for you all. I used to think that these were called the Beatitudes, but they're not. This is 1 Corinthians 13, 4-7. The Beatitudes apparently are something different. But this is what I wanted to read. Let me get to it. 1 Corinthians. There it is. Okay. 13, 4-7. Okay. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. And I'm going to move on away from Jesus at this point, but I just wanted to say one more thing in regards to what's happening now. How do you think Jesus would feel about the Catholic Church knowing that, like, there isn't a single country on this earth or hardly a single Catholic church on this earth that doesn't have a priest that has either harmed children or has looked the other way. One or the other. It's everywhere, like in almost every Catholic church. Why? Do you think he'd be okay with that? As much as Jesus loved children? You think he'd be okay with them turning a blind eye and covering it up to protect their priests and power players? My opinion, and you can feel free to disagree, Jesus would be absolutely disgusted with the Catholic Church and with anybody who wants to excuse it, including a lot of Christian churches these days who want to excuse it too. My opinion. He would be disgusted with it. But let's move on. Oh yeah, before we do real quick, one more thing. This is the guy. Constantine I himself. Tell me that's not the creepiest Roman head you have ever seen. Like, what is going on with his eyes? What is going on with that, guys? You see that? You see how big those eyeballs are? And how, like, rigid the bones in his face are? Like, I don't know. I think that they did their statues, like, maybe with a little more symbolism. I don't know. But, dude, those eyes, that's creepy. That's creepy. They should have done the eyes a little smaller. That doesn't even look natural. Okay, maybe it's not supposed to look natural. But yeah, I'm not going to get into all that. I kind of went over a brief history, I guess here, we'll go over the dates real quick. Okay. Of, when the, roundabout times when the Protestant Reformation was happening, at least in England, as it pertains to, like, the royal family. Okay, so in 1485, it was all still Roman Catholic under Henry VII, okay? Henry VIII comes along, and according to history, he separates from the Catholic Church and establishes a Protestant Church of England. Now, according to history texts, this is because of, what's her name, Anne Boleyn, because he wanted to marry her and divorce his wife. And I'm starting, and I always 100% believe that. I'm starting to get a little skeptical now, though. How true or accurate that may be. Like, I don't know. Like, they paint him as someone who just took what he wanted, right? So this is the thing that I always couldn't reconcile with, like, history, right? The way they painted him, at least. They always painted him as a king who was very much into pleasure, who just took what he wanted without repercussions from anybody. However, though, wouldn't it have been easier, if that's the case, wouldn't it have been easier, and I'm not trying to be cold, I'm just trying to say how I feel about this. Wouldn't it have been a lot easier and a lot less dramatic, a lot less war, like, if he had just raped Anne Boleyn? I mean, I'm sorry to say the big elephant in the room out loud, because I don't ever want to, like, ever, I'm not saying that would have been better. Of course not. I'm not saying that. In a way, it's kind of weird to me. It's like, well, someone who's, like, does all this stuff, who would behead people and this and that, why is he, like, he's trying to be so honorable to her, right? So something doesn't mesh in my head with all this. Something doesn't quite mesh. He wants to be honorable to one woman while stabbing his wife in the back? I'm so confused. But anyway, I don't know. I'm sure a psychiatrist would argue with me. And that's cool. I mean, I'm no historian, but, like, something just never really meshed well in my gut with that. Okay. This article, here's why sex abuse survivor organization has grave concern about Pope Leo XIV. The SNAP network is urging the new Pope to create a universal zero tolerance law for sex abuse and cover-up. The bullet points of this article, what they talk about: SNAP, a national advocacy group for survivors of clergy sexual abuse, issued a statement expressing, and I just said it, the group cited his handling of a abuse case in Chicago, where he was the provincial supervisor of the Augustinians. You can end the abuse crisis. The only question is, will you? SNAP's statement said. And we see that works so well with Pope Francis, but anyway. Okay, on Thursday, May 8th, shortly before the Vatican announced the election of Cardinal Robert Prevost, who is Pope Leo, the SNAP network released a lengthy statement to the new leader. In its 6-page letter, the organization called on the new pope to enact for the first time a universal zero-tolerance law for sexual abuse and cover-up. Yeah, because keep in mind, like I said, the Vatican did take one step to make it a crime in the Vatican, and as they admitted their intention behind that was to prosecute these cases themselves, and that doesn't sit well with me at all, because it's almost like a mob boss given reins to handle his own gangsters who get out of line. I don't know. It doesn't sit well. Okay. He chose his name because of a pope from 1878 to 1903. I'm going to have to look into that pope, see what he was all about. But, it had grave concern about his record for managing abuse cases. Okay, here we go. The group cited the case of Father James Ray, a priest accused of abusing at least 13 minors and banned in 1991 from being alone with minors and working in a parish, who in 2000 was allowed to move a friary? I don't know. I have no idea what that is. You guys can tell I'm not Catholic. I have no idea what that is. In Chicago, half a block from a Catholic school. The Chicago Sun-Times reported in 2021. Oh my God, a half a block from a school. 9 years after he was accused of abusing 13 minors. What the hell? Pope Leo. The main, I'm not sure what his position was at this time, but it was when he was in Chicago and could have done something about it. Okay, here we go. When church officials, including Pope Leo, who was provincial supervisor of Chicago, see, there you go, in 2000, reportedly approved the move. He approved this. And he told the courts and the legal people that there was no school in the immediate area, but there was a school a half a block away. Is that what it said? It was a half a block or half a mile? I don't know. But close. Very close. That is, either one's the immediate area. Especially in Chicago. Snap says there's a school nearby, and the group accused the new Pope Leo of endangering the safety of the children at the school by approving the move. The Vatican has reportedly denied that the new Pope approved Ray to move to this place. Oh my gosh, you're kidding me, right? In 2002, Ray was finally removed from the place and from public ministry. Well, according to CNN and KVIA. He was removed from the priesthood in 2012, 10 years later. Wow. So they say that they removed him from whatever that place is, and from public ministry. So what does that mean? Was he in private ministry for the next 10 years? Because he wasn't removed from his priesthood until 10 years later. So what the hell? Was it because they knew this movie was coming out soon? Who knows? I don't know. Besides this, Snap also says that when the new Pope Leo served as a bishop in Peru until 2023, when Pope Francis reassigned him to Rome, 3 women filed a complaint to the new Pope Leo, saying that starting in 2007, 2 priests had abused them when they were minors, the Pillar reported. In 2022, the women filed civil complaints accusing the diocese, yes, got that word right, of ignoring their allegations, CNN reported. The case was closed a month later. What? Because the statute of limitations had expired. What? Wait, how could it have been closed if they filed a lawsuit not about the abuse, but about the diocese of ignoring their allegations? I don't know what the statute of limitation is on that, but like, that's horrible, because it was like they were trying to get their own people to resolve this, but they wouldn't. So then they go to court, but by then it was too late. But you see, now they want to take these like, come on. Are we supposed to believe they have not historically dealt with this? They've only hid it and abused it, or covered it up and moved them around. And now we're supposed to believe that just because they made some kind of law at the Vatican, that they're going to do anything about it? What is going on? The diocese said that Pope Leo met with the women when they first filed their complaint, according to CNN. One of the priests was suspended and the other left the priesthood, according to CNN reports. The diocese also said it forwarded the women's complaints to the whatever that is, for the Doctrine of the Faith in Rome, which closed the case in August 2023. Okay, so I guess when the statute had fell through, they did go through Rome and all of that, but then the civil cases were closed. The Vatican has reportedly denied that Pope Leo did anything wrong in the Peruvian case. In fact, sociologist Rodolfo Soriano Nunez told CNN that Pope Leo was one of the few bishops in Peru who actively worked to support victims of clergy abuse. So here's someone who's on Pope Leo's side. I think Pope Leo was the best bishop in Peru in dealing with abuse cases in his diocese, he told CNN. And there were plenty of cases. He dealt with the issue as far as he was able to deal with it. Snap wants the Vatican to launch a full investigation into both cases, Newsweek reports. And Snap, I like Snap. I know they're a very good organization, but surely they know. Like, I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, like I said, this isn't like news. New news. Like the Catholic Church covering it up and then just appointing the ones who cover it up into higher positions. I noticed they couldn't get a positive reference from Chicago. But anyways, on to Pope Francis. Catholic Church, not Pope Francis, just the Catholic Church in general. This is a BBC News article. I think we'll see in a second what the date is. But this is when they talk about the general systemic Catholic Church child abuse scandal. Okay, this is an article from May 2018. And it was updated in 2021. Okay. Odd date, October 2021. The year 2021 is so significant in a lot of ways, isn't it? And we thought it was going to be 2020 that was which it was, but I don't know. A lot of stuff keeps happening in 2021. Including updating this old article. Okay, from Australian country towns to schools in Ireland and cities across the U.S., the Catholic Church has faced an avalanche of child abuse accusations in the last few decades. High-profile cases and harrowing testimony given to public inquiries have continued to keep the issue in the headlines. In the most recent development, this is 2018, okay? Most recent development, a damning inquiry. This is 3 years after that movie. Damning inquiry found that some 216,000 children, oh my God, 250,000 children just in France, had been abused by members of the clergy since 1950. I know that's a long period of time, but I don't care. That is a lot of generations of children in France. A lot of children. So many. A Vatican statement said Pope Francis felt pain, here we go, over the findings, and expressed hopes for a path of redemption. Let that sink in. A path of redemption for the small fraction of priests who harmed 250,000 of France's most vulnerable since 1950. And Pope Francis' only concern was a path of redemption. You think this is why they made it a crime in the Vatican, so they could take care of it and sweep it under the rug before these damning inquiries come out about? Because this was just in France. Keep in mind that the Boston Globe had exposed that this is like almost every single country that you can think of that this is going on in the Catholic Church. This inquiry, 3 years after that movie where they talk about the Boston Globe and their investigation, 3 years after that movie comes out, they do an inquiry just in France. It's 250,000 kids. Think about that. Like, how many children has this happened to in every other country? Like, oh my God, that's like almost every generation for the past 70 years. It's almost like at this point, every person alive in every generation has members in their generation, many members in their generation. The implications of this. A church supposedly found by Jesus, although we know the truth now. Don't attach Jesus' name to this organization, please. Efforts by the Pope to address the problem have included holding an unprecedented summit on unprecedented, maybe for the Catholic Church is unprecedented. Oh my God. On pedophilia in the church and changing its laws to explicitly criminalize sexual abuse. About damn time, wouldn't you think? But alleged cover-ups continue to dog the Catholic Church, and victims groups say the Vatican has not done nearly enough to right its wrongs. Because they don't want to. They don't think they did anything wrong, because they're evil. The church, remember, important difference here. How did this all come to light? Although some accusations date back to the 1950s, molestation by priests was first given significant media attention in the 1980s in the US and Canada. In the 1990s, the issue began to grow, with stories emerging in Argentina, Australia, and elsewhere. It was like popping up everywhere at this point. Because we're in a new age. It doesn't mean that this was a new issue. It's easier to like catch on to a pattern in these days. Because remember, 1980s, 1990s is when computers and internet and all this other stuff, information started getting shared quicker. So keep that all, 1995, the Archbishop of Vienna in Austria stepped down amid sexual abuse allegations, rocking the church there. Also in that decade, revelations began of widespread historical abuse in Ireland. By the early 2000s, abuse within the church was a major global story. in the U.S., determined reporting by the Boston Globe newspaper, gotta give credit where credit's due, as captured in the 2015 film Spotlight. And Boston's a very Catholic city, exposed widespread abuse and how pedophile priests were moved around by church leaders instead of being held accountable. And now they want to hold them. They say they would. Okay. It prompted people to come forward across the U.S. and around the world. A church commission report in 2004 said that more than 4,000 U.S. Roman Catholic priests had faced abuse allegations in the last 50 years, in cases involving more than 10,000 children, mostly boys. Now, in my opinion, that tidbit's important. That's important. Because a lot of people, including myself, I myself at one point believed this theory, was that the reason that happened is because most of the Catholic priests were gay. And I used to believe that, but I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think it's a little bit more, and I could be making false connections, but ever since I read that Willie Lynch letter, I don't know, just, doesn't it sound an awful lot like what they were talking about in the Willie Lynch letter about like demasculinizing men and defeminizing women? Like, I could be wrong, but like, if it is linked, it would make sense, because if you think about it, like, they do demasculinize a boy when he's that age. And not just that, like, there's just so many other factors, because boys and like men are the ones who are like least likely to admit when they've been abused. So even though we have statistics that it rarely happens to men or boys, that's just simply not true. It's just simply not true. They just, men and women are different, and like, ugh. I need to move on from this because I don't want to start crying in this video. Let's move on from this. A 2009 report found that sexual and psychological abuse was endemic in Catholic-run industrial schools and orphanages in Ireland for most of the 20th century. A 5-year Australian inquiry in 2017 found that tens of thousands of children were sexually abused in Australian institutions over decades, including churches, schools, and sports clubs. Damn. The head of the French inquiry said that until the early 2000s, the church had shown, quote, deep, total, and even cruel indifference towards victims. He stressed that even today the abuse had not been eradicated, and called for the victims to be compensated and for reforms within the church. And then you get into recent cases, and like, as you can see, we're 10 years after, like, they made a big giant Hollywood movie about it. It even won like awards and stuff, and it told you at the end of the movie how deep this went. Like, I mean, I hate to give credit to Hollywood for anything, but this might be the one movie I can think of that actually got an award. I don't know what their agenda behind it was. I don't. But maybe it was to hide their own hands. Who knows? However, they still exposed it and showed you at the end of the movie how deep it went. And then come to find out 10 years later, it went even deeper than that. It went even deeper than that. Well, obviously it did, because for all the ones coming out talking about it, how many of you think are still scared to talk? You know, and for good reason, because look, 10 years later, look what's happening. Okay, Theodore McCarrick, a former Roman Catholic cardinal in the U.S., was defrocked over claims he assaulted a teenager in New York in the early 1970s. Thought to be the highest ranking U.S. Catholic to face abuse charges, has said he has no recollection of the alleged abuse and pleaded not guilty at a U.S. court just last month. This is in 2018. Okay. Catholic Church in Scotland announced that it was setting up an independent watchdog to deal with the abuse complaints against members of the clergy, following a number of scandals where the church was accused of failing to respond to concerns. Germany, top Roman Catholic cleric Cardinal Reinhard Marx earlier this year offered his resignation over abuse scandals, saying it was important to him to share the responsibility for the catastrophe. Whatever that means. However, the Pope later What? The Pope rejected his resignation. So, wow. Ugh. November 2020, New York's Attorney General filed a lawsuit against the Buffalo Catholic Diocese, alleging its leaders protected priests accused of abuse. The diocese has pledged full cooperation with authorities. Oh, this must be the updated stuff. Okay, because it was updated in 2021. Okay. French priest Bernard Preynat was sentenced to 5 years in prison in March 2020 for abusing dozens of children in the 70s. He was sentenced to 5 years. What? Oh my god, and he did it for, what, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s for like 30 years. And he got 5 years? During his trial, he told the court he had not understood how serious or grave his crimes were. He told the court he didn't understand. I didn't understand how bad this was. All my other Catholic buddies were doing it. We were all doing it. Hurting little vulnerable children. Remember, it doesn't say dozens of adults. It says dozens of children. In 70s, 80s, 90s, that's a long time. And he didn't understand. He told the court he didn't understand. And they gave him 5 years. Australian Cardinal George Pell, the most senior Catholic figure ever jailed for such crimes, a cardinal, had his conviction for child abuse overturned in April 2020 and was freed from prison. Australia's High Court judges agreed that the jury had not properly considered all the evidence presented at trial. But I guess they did. See, this was wrong. This is where you can see now, right? Where all this, like, you know, where they've got their little puppets in place. It's in all these high courts. The ones who can overturn any decisions and stuff. That's where they've got their little puppets at. The former senior advisor to the Pope had consistently made... and he was a senior advisor! I'm sorry, I didn't mean to yell, but like... how infuriating is this? They've been caught red-handed and they're still not holding anyone accountable. What the fuck is going on? Does anybody not see this? How has the church responded? Pope Francis called for decisive action when he was elected in 2013. But critics say he has not done enough to hold account bishops who allegedly covered it. Obviously not. I mean, like, he was, like, freeing, like, helping to free his advisors. Like, his advisors were implicated in all this. Like, I believe at this point it's a standard for a pope to have harmed a child or to have covered it up. I believe it. And because, I mean, like, what the hell else? Like, it's just, like, everywhere. How could it not? In 2018, he wrote to all Roman Catholic Church condemning clerical sex abuse and demanding to end cover-ups. His predecessor, Pope Benedict, has been accused of failing to protect children and suppressing investigations, allegations he denied. Before him, under Pope John Paul II, Cardinal Bernard Law, the disgraced figure at the center of the Boston scandal, was given a symbolic role in Rome close to the Vatican and allowed to maintain his rate despite outrage from victims. They don't care. They don't care about any of their underlings. As long as you do what they say, tell them all your sins, and they get to do what they want, have their own laws. And it's only when they faced with enough outrage that they even change those laws. Between 2000 and 2010, several huge payouts were made by U.S. dioceses to settle victims' claims. Pope Benedict told bishops in 2011 in new guidelines that they had to report any suspected cases to local police promptly. Previously, all cases were supposed to be referred to Rome, so then they went through a period from 2011 to about, 2018 to 2021, where they wanted it all referred to the police, but now they want it, once again, referred to them. Big freaking surprise. Okay. Under Francis. Okay, yeah, this is where it is. Where a special panel has been set up to deal with the issue, but it has faced setbacks, including high-level resignations. Why has it faced setbacks? Why is it so hard? 2017, Marie Collins, an Irish survivor of abuse, left the group, citing stumbling blocks and hindrances. So they were trying to have a panel of survivors, and a lot of high-level people started resigning. Wow. They couldn't even look these survivors in the face. During the summit in February 2019, Pope Francis promised to end cover-ups, saying that all abusers would be brought to justice. His announcement of changes to law earlier this year marked the biggest overhaul of the Roman Catholic Church's criminal code in decades. Because like I said, up until then, they didn't even criminalize child porn or child molestation in the Vatican for their people. The new rules, which come into effect in December, make abuse, grooming minors, and child pornography and covering up abuse a criminal offense under Vatican law. Pope said one aim was to reduce the number of look, this is his aim. To reduce the number of cases in which the penalty was left to the discretion of the authorities. The authorities are too hard on his guys. So yeah. Full circle. Catholic institution origins. They want to destroy Jesus' message of love. They failed. So they turned it into a weapon. When Constantine decided what text to leave out of the Bible. And like I said, in my other YouTube channel, I read a lot of, I've been reading a lot of these Gnostic texts, and I'm going to keep doing it because they're important. Jesus' message was not about organized religion and listening to bishops and popes. In fact, his whole message was about rejecting these authorities in favor of personal spiritual growth. But anyways, go to my other channel, and about the one true God of love. So go to my other channel, check it out. Yeah, I hope that this Kevin A is right, and that if this Pope Leo has been involved in either a cover-up or in some kind of ritual like these eyewitnesses are saying, it's time that we hold them accountable. The church won't do it. The government has tried, and apparently they can't for whatever reason. So, the best way to kill an evil beast like this is to cut it off. You don't need the Catholic Church for your connection with God. And if you believe that, go back to Jesus' real message. Kingdom of heaven is within. God is love. With that, have a good day.